Crimean Tatars. People here in Crimea who are supposedly suffering the heaviest from the yoke of Russian occupation. According to some Ukrainian sources, either today or tomorrow they will be put in carts and shipped off to Siberia. But what is really going on here? We're in the ancient Crimean Tatar capital of Bakhchisarai. We came here and we traveled around the peninsula to talk to some of their activists, learn about their culture and history, and find out that Medjalis, the body that supposedly represents them, actually has terrorist links. Hello, my name is Alex, and this here, the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University, go buff and blue, is my alma mater. So, many people who I studied with ended up working in Congress, the State Department, and all over Washington, D.C. So I know very well how that city works, and it heavily relies on Google and Wikipedia. For example, when there was a campaign to discredit the Russian Games, the Olympic Games in Sochi, which were actually going on at the same time as the Euromaidan in Kiev, people just went online and typed in Sochi problems, and Wikipedia told them that there were some problems between Russians and Cherkessians, and that was the talking points used back then. The same is happening now. Anti-Russian sentiments need to be fueled, so Google to the rescue. Crimea problems? Why, the Crimean Tatars, of course. How do you know? Well, Wikipedia and some guy who has not been there for years told me. Sounds great, send it to the press. So, we, on the other hand, decided to do this crazy thing. We actually came here and talked to these people for real.
Okay, so in recent weeks, the issue of Crimean Tatars has been raised again. European Parliament is having hearings about it. Ukraine is demanding that their deportation be considered a genocide. And even the supposedly apolitical Eurovision song contest, there's a Ukrainian singer Jamala performing a song about the deportation of the Crimean Tatars in 1944. The reason for this is that May 18th is right around the corner, and that is a day that commemorates the Crimean Tatar deportation. So in order for our viewers not to be swept up in lies and propaganda, and since many of you have asked for it in the comments, we decided to make this video to explain the at times difficult Crimean Tatar issue to you. By the way, this is our third video from Crimea, and for a better understanding of the history of all of Crimea, not just the Crimean Tatars, as well as modern-day issues like the, quote, Russian annexation, the Budapest Memorandum, the economics of Crimea, and so on, we suggest you check out our previous two videos. You should be able to open them by clicking on the screen, but if that doesn't work, there are links to them in the description. Obviously, as the saying goes, in order to understand the present, we need to learn history. But since history is probably not the favorite subject for many, we will condense it as much as possible and try to focus on wars, raids, and damsels in distress. So the Crimean Tatars are a Turkic people whose ethnicity was formed in, you guessed it, Crimea, between the 13th and the 17th century. In the 13th century, Crimea was part of the Mongol Empire, or the Golden Horde. Later in the 14th century, Crimean Tatars were converted to Islam, and in the 15th century, Turks conquered southern Crimea and established the Crimean Khanate, an Ottoman vassal state that would exist until Crimea became part of Russia in the 18th century. Okay, so if you dozed off for a second while I was giving out those dates, please come back. This next part is important. So by far the biggest part of the economy of the Crimean Khanate was the slave trade. For centuries, the Crimean Khanate and their allies would launch slave raids into South Russia lands, driving tens of thousands into slavery, and selling these people into the slave markets of the Islamic world. It is estimated that during its existence, the Crimean Khanate enslaved as many as 3 million Slavs of South Russia. Here's a quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica I would like to share with you. Approximately 75% of the Crimean population consisted of slaves and freedmen, and much of the free population was highly predatory, engaged either in gathering of slaves or in selling of them. It is known that for every slave the Crimeans sold in the market, they killed outright several other people during the raids, and a couple more died on the way to the slave market. So let that sink in for a second. 3 million slaves were taken from Russian Slavic lands. Even more were killed in raids and died on their ways to slave markets. There was only one slave trade operation in history that was bigger than this, the Atlantic slave trade. So even though the Crimean Khanate was responsible for driving 3 million South Russians into slavery and slaughtering many more during the raids, when Crimea became part of Russia, there was no significant retaliation against them that one might expect. Of course, Russia immediately outright banned slavery and slave trade. So former slavers probably had to go to new vocational schools or something. But overall, the Crimean Tatars were allowed to live their lives and were not repressed under the Russian rule. To demonstrate this, we come to our damsel in distress story. In 1787, several years after acquiring Crimea for Russia, Catherine the Great decided to inspect her new lands. Catherine was accompanied by multiple ambassadors and dignitaries from Western European nations, as well as Joseph, the Emperor of Austria. There were two instances during the trip that surprised the Europeans. The first was when, as soon as entering Crimea, Catherine guard duties were given from the Russian soldiers to local Crimean Tatars and others. Europeans, used to being hated by subjugated people, were amazed that Catherine was so sure of Crimean Tatar loyalty that she trusted them with her life. Another telling situation happened later during the trip. When visiting Bakhchisarai, where we currently are, Catherine's horses could not hold the coach on the mountain road. The coach broke loose and was rolling towards a certain death, and local Crimean Tatar horsemen galloped to the aid of the Empress and managed to save her just in the nick of time. These two stories are proof that the Crimean Tatars did not have significant resentment towards Russia. While researching this, it actually amazed me how similar this story is to our beloved Mother of Dragons, Khaleesi, Daenerys Stormborn. So we have a semi-nomadic warrior nation whose way of life is based on raiding and slaving, and a foreign enlightened princess trying to eradicate slavery. Even the Crimean Tatar ruler's title of Khan sounds a lot like Khal, which I believe is no incident. And according to rumors about the Russian Empress, there were plenty of Games of Thrones style sex positions in Catherine's court, but unfortunately, no dragons. So going back to history, in the 19th century, Russia allowed the Crimean Tatars to develop their language and culture. Crimean Tatars published a bilingual Tertsemak Perevodchik newspaper, and by late 19th century had over 300 Jadid or New Methods schools teaching the Crimean Tatar language on the peninsula. However, after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, collectivization and other Soviet policies that followed, there was growing resentment among the Crimean Tatars. Because of this, when the Nazis captured Crimea, a significant number of Crimean Tatars collaborated with the occupying regime, and several thousand joined various Nazi military units, including the SS Waffengruppe Krim. So, when the Red Army beat the Nazis back and liberated Crimea in 1944, thousands of Crimean Tatars were rounded up and, for collaborating with the Nazis, were moved deeper within the Soviet Union, away from the border. Oh, damn it, crap, this is raw video footage. #fail. What you're seeing now actually is not the Crimean Tatar camps, but rather the Japanese internment camps in the United States. More than 100,000 Japanese Americans were interned in the camps in the United States during World War II. The law to round up Japanese Americans and intern them was signed only 2 months after Pearl Harbor bombing. None of these people committed any crimes, and they were interned before any significant fighting begun. The deportation of Crimean Tatars, on the other hand, happened after tens of thousands of them had collaborated with the Nazis, and after Russians lost tens of millions of people to the Nazis, and when the front was still very close to Crimea, in fear that these quote-unquote elements might stir up trouble in the rear. I would like to stress that I'm not saying that the Tatar deportation or the Japanese internment in the United States were okay. They were not. These were horrible things, especially considering that thousands of Crimean Tatars bravely fought in the Red Army. My point here is when comparing this and the Japanese internment is not to defend it, but to show you that those were very difficult times, and decision-making in an all-out and most horrific war in human history were made in haste, and at times probably viewed as necessary evil. However, it is important to note that both the United States and the USSR and later Russia passed official laws declaring these actions of the 1940s to be wrong and apologized for them. The US in 1988 and the USSR in 1991. So now that we are caught up with the history, let's look at what happened to the Crimean Tatars since Ukrainian independence in 1991. So, during our trip to Crimea, we spoke to many Crimean Tatars. We're going to quote two of them, an activist and a scholar, to help us explain what has been happening here in the last 25 years and what is going on now. Seytumerny Mitulayev is the founder and leader of a large Crimean Tatar organization, Kerim Berelgi, and Lenur Usmanov is the head of the Department of Inter-Ethnic Studies at the Sevastopol Academy of Sciences. So, here's a quick look at the recent events. In 1991, as we said, the Supreme Council of the Soviet Union passed a resolution declaring the deportation of Crimean Tatars to be wrong, soon after the USSR collapsed. For years before, and especially after the passing of the resolution and the Ukrainian independence, many Crimean Tatars started to return to their ancestral homelands. You have probably heard of the Medjlis of the Crimean Tatars, an organization that is supposed to represent them, and that was recently banned by Russian authorities for extremism. We asked our Crimean Tatar experts about the Medjlis.
Ну, Меджлис, структура, которая была, она в корне была создана правильно вначале. Но те лидеры, которые были, они ее полностью исказили, перевернули и из нее сделали как свой бизнес-центр, понимаете? Угодные, кто были, значит, Меджлис их поощрял, премировали, они жили. Те люди, которые имели свое мнение, они были за Меджлисом, им не давали пройти ни в структуры власти, им не давали даже, пусть он будет 10 раз или 100 раз умнее и профессиональнее, если не находили общий язык с Меджлисом, этот человек был неугодный для Мустафы Джемилева, Чубарова и его команды.
As you see, the original idea of the Medjlis was good. However, soon it became a corrupt organization with bribes, cronyism, and lack of transparency becoming the norm.
Оно вначале вроде бы было не коррумпировано. Аппетит, говорят, приходит во время еды. Очень много денег, которые поступали, народ их практически... Ну вот ни одного компактного проживания в Крыму у нас на сегодняшний день нету, что можно привести гостей и показать, что вот мы крымские татары. Нет, за 25 лет практически ничего не было сделано. Одни говорят, что более $1 миллиарда денег прошло, другие одно говорят, я это судить не могу, но очень большая помощь шла из Турции тоже. Тика такое было. Очень много денег уделялись на дома. Люди практически, кто нуждался в этом, многие не могли получать или надо было давать часть отката этих денег для того, чтобы его утвердили.
Задача Мустафы Джемилева Чубарова заключалась только в одном – получить неограниченные потоки средств от крымско-татарских диаспор из-за рубежа, эти потоки направить не в интересах крымских татар, а в личный карман. Почему? Да дело в том, что как только народ начнет хорошо жить, его не будет интересовать ни Украина, ни Европа. А хорошее благосостояние граждан приводит к хорошему взаимоотношению их с другими народами. А когда народ держит на коротком поводке и говорят о том, что во всем виноваты русские, то по такому принципу Меджлис и пытался манипулировать 23 года и сейчас пытается манипулировать над крымскими татарами.
Support for the Medjlis was falling long before the Russian quote annexation. The reason for this was that in 23 years of Ukrainian independence, neither Ukraine nor the Medjlis managed to significantly improve the lives of Crimean Tatars. In fact, Ukrainian politicians and media, who today are so infatuated with Crimean Tatars, had very different opinions of them before 2014. Here are some quotes.
Тепер я вам кажу свою позицію по кримським татарам. По фактичному прояві тероризму в Україні, чого раніше не було. І тут ця політика, або ми поставимо всіх на місце дуже жорстко. І я вам скажу, що в цьому постановці, жорсткій постановці на місце ситуації у Криму будуть складні речі. Я не хочу заглиблюватись в що. Але це не пройде просто так, через політичний діалог і через обнімання. Але або влада покаже, що тут є центральна українська влада.
This is one of the leaders of the Euromaidan. Until recently, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who now is a lover of all Crimean Tatar things. Here, he is saying they should be dealt with harshly and that they could be secret saboteurs who will drive Crimea away from Ukraine to Turkey.
Або Крим потихо відійде не тільки до Росії, тому що ви зараз кажете про Росію. Ви забули про Туреччину. Купіть карту Туреччини, і ви побачите, що Крим відзначений одним кольором, як і вся Туреччина до сьогоднішнього дня. Такі карти є.
Here is a short part of a very anti-Crimean Tatar piece on Ukrainian TV, made before the quote annexation, and a quote from a local politician.
А направлена на взрыв той межэтнической ситуации, которая без того сложна на полуострове Крым.
How about this report from Ukrainian TSN channel, showing Ukrainian police fighting with Crimean Tatars who were demanding language and other rights? Unfortunately, few anti-Crimean Tatar things said by Ukrainian politicians before 2014 can be found on YouTube. But even if Ukrainian politicians and media didn't speak out against them directly before 2014, they definitely didn't care for them and pay attention to the Crimean Tatars. And the locals here remember this. Finally, this is Anatoly Shary, Ukrainian patriot and the country's most popular independent journalist. In this video, links to all these videos are in the description. He looks at super pro-Crimean Tatar Ukrainian activists in 2014 and in 2013. In 2014 and later, each May 18th, they publicly cry buckets of tears for Crimean Tatars. Before 2013, not a single one of them ever cared about these people. Among the most important things that the Crimean Tatars asked from Ukraine for 23 years was to make the Crimean Tatar language an official language in Crimea. For 23 years, the authorities in Kiev resisted, just like they resisted giving tens of millions of Russian speakers equal language rights. You know what Russian occupiers did? As soon as Crimea rejoined Russia in 2014, Crimean Tatar language was given an official status. Ukrainian language too was given the status of one of the official 3 languages. This is guaranteed in the Constitution of the Republic of Crimea. Something that Ukraine refused to do for the Crimean Tatars for 23 years, Russia did within seconds of reuniting with Crimea.
Что им мешало за 23 года сделать Крым, крымско-татарскую автономную округ. Ничего не мешало. Что им мешало сделать так, чтобы крымско-татарский язык стал государственным? Россия это сделала.
And despite all the lies in Ukrainian and Western media, trying to play the quote, oppressed Crimean Tatar people card, doing everything so that Crimean Tatars feel comfortable, has been Russian policy in Crimea since day one. Well, actually since day -6. A week before the Crimean referendum in March 2014, Mintimir Shaimiev, the former president of Russia's Tatarstan Republic, an incredibly dynamic and successful Russian region where Kazan Tatars, the kin of Crimean Tatars, live, visited with Mustafa Dzhemilov, the fervent anti-Russian activist and head of the Medjlis at the time. In 2013, last year before the Crimean crisis began, Russian Tatarstan had one of the highest GDP per capita in the country of $23,290, almost 10 times higher than the GDP per capita of Crimea, of only $2,952 that same year. The Tatar language is one of the official languages of Tatarstan, and the Kazan Tatars enjoy being both part of proud and ancient Tatar and Islamic cultures, as well as being citizens of the Russian Federation. During the meeting between Dzhemilov and Shaimiev, Vladimir Putin personally called Dzhemilov and guaranteed that Crimean Tatars will not be discriminated against. On the contrary, they would be given language and other rights they only dreamt of under Ukraine. But Dzhemilov, who remembered the stories of deportation, let his personal anti-Russian prejudices and not the well-being of his people take precedent in his decision-making. We asked Mr. Nimitulayev, whose family was also deported, about his experience with deportation and his feelings towards Russia.
Второй дедушка мой, который был участником войны, а отец родной мой был 14 лет угнан в Германию, когда освобождали их американцы. Собрали их, построили, американцы сказали: вы, если уедете в Советский Союз, вас каждого арестуют. Практически так оно и произошло. В Трудармию их загнали, в Тульской области. Но на Россию, на Москву обиды никакой не может быть. Была обида на сталинские репрессии, которых коснулось очень много людей.
So yes, Russia, or rather Stalin, and the Crimean Tatars have some very difficult history together. But like we mentioned before, Japanese and Americans, or Indians and British, also have difficult history together. But that doesn't stop them from engaging each other. But according to our experts, most Crimean Tatars today want to look to the future. They don't want to be used in political games and realize that Russia has already given them more rights and opportunities than they ever had under Ukraine.
Но наши старики сказали так, что мы приехали в Крым для того, чтобы сделать Крым процветающий и быть достойными представителями этого Крыма, чтобы остальные народы нами гордились. Что делает Мустафа Джемилев, Чубаров и Ислямов? Он позорит крымских татар. И татары, они отличаются тем, что они приехали исторически на историческую крымскую землю для того, чтобы возродить Крым, а не воевать.
Besides the language renaissance, they're also experiencing a religious renaissance. Over 600 Crimean Tatars are planning to travel to Mecca on the Hajj this year through various Russian Muslim organizations. That number is almost 10 times higher than about 50 pilgrims that traveled to the holy city under Ukraine in 2013 and before. Neither Dzhemilov nor other prominent quote activists have been to Crimea since 2014. But despite not being here for years, these so-called activists persist on spreading rumors about Crimea in the West. Because of this, support for the Medjlis, which due to constant cronyism and corruption was shrinking even before 2014.
Если говорить о Меджлисе и его роли на данный момент влияние на Крым, то имеет минимальное, порядка 15% от существующего населения. И то это влияние обеспечивается за счет телеканала АТР Ленура Ислямова.
Народ хочет жить в мире и согласии. Когда призывают, что войной придут и вернут Крым Украине, я считаю, что люди, которые еще как-то относились к Меджлису хорошо, вот эти призывы, которые теперь продовольственная блокада, энергоблокада, людей отворачивают от них.
The Crimean Tatars who are here see and experience the benefits of living with Russia firsthand. Then they go online and read Medjlis or other foreign media and learn that they're living under constant oppressions and fear. Imagine living in Hawaii, going on a weather service, and each day reading that it is going to snow, sooner or later realizing that weather people know nothing.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
You will stop paying attention to them. And that is the case with Crimean Tatars. The celebration footage we have been showing you is from the recent Hudrules, or Spring Festival celebration. It was held on May 3rd and was attended by tens of thousands of Crimeans of all ethnicities and supported and financed by local authorities. That's not what repression looks like, is it? The anti-Russian ATR channel was shut down for promoting radicalism. This footage that you're seeing now comes from Millet, a Crimean Tatar channel that is rapidly growing in popularity. Medjelis, the organization that failed to do what is best for its people, has left. Others, like Mr. Nimitulaev's Karim Berilgi that we mentioned, are around to help Crimean Tatars and all others build a better and more prosperous future. But as I said before, my former classmates in Washington, D.C. are having none of it. If the world learns the truth about the Crimean Tatars, Washington will lose amazing anti-Russian talking points. So most of the information, most of the, once again, facts I have presented you with are silenced and hidden from the people in the West. Instead, the so-called Crimean Tatar activists of the Medjelis and other radical groups are doing everything they can to actually bring about repressions of their people in Crimea. Last fall, these so-called Crimean Tatar activists started a food blockade of the peninsula, not letting anyone traveling from Ukraine to bring food into Crimea. People in Crimea didn't starve, of course, but actually thousands of Ukrainian farmers who for decades sold their harvest to Crimea did go bankrupt. But prices here did go up a little. Since the blockade was advertised as a Crimean Tatar protest action, I am sure it caused some resentment. Then later, these activists committed open acts of terrorism by blowing up power lines going into Crimea, plunging the peninsula into the dark. Again, probably some less educated locals started seeing some Crimean Tatars as potential terrorists and saboteurs. The logic, if I can use that word here, behind these actions is as twisted as it gets. The public reasoning is, we will starve the occupiers to death to free Crimea. But all people of all ethnicities on the peninsula are being hurt by these actions. Imagine for a second that when the Soviet Union blockaded Berlin in 1948, the West, instead of organizing the Berlin airlift, instead started blockading food shipments to Berliners itself. If that makes sense to you, you should join the Medjelis. But the unspoken logic behind these actions is even more sinister. To cause a growing rift between the Slavic and the Turkic populations of Crimea, to raise the level of resentment towards the Crimean Tatars to the level that the lies about repressions do start coming true, and then to fly to Washington, Brussels, or Turkish Ankara and say, see, we told you Russians would do it, and ask for more cash. Therefore, in the end, the motto of these so-called Crimean Tatar activists is, the worse it gets for our people, the better it will be for us. Once again, is there any question why they have lost popularity and legitimacy among their own people? But it is still amazing that these people have some legitimacy left in the West. The man you're seeing on your screen now is Lanur Islamov, a self-styled anti-Russian activist and the owner of the ATR TV channel that was forced to leave Crimea. This man, a Russian citizen by the way, in 2014 supported reunification with Russia. But then, after realizing the corrupt practices that he made his millions from under Ukraine will stop in Russian Crimea, he switched sides. He also took out several loans from Russian banks totaling to over 1.5 billion rubles, or about $25 million, and after failing to pay them back, decided to be one of the organizers of the quote, Crimean Tatars resistance against Russia. But his flip-flopping national allegiances and financial machinations is something we can talk about later. Take a look at this flag behind him. This is the Turkish nationalist flag that often goes hand in hand with the flag of the Buzkurtlar, or the Grey Wolves. Islamov even posted a picture on his Facebook, bragging about the Grey Wolves coming to help him with the Crimean blockade. Ever see this guy? Probably not, but I am sure you know who this person is. Pope John Paul II. And the man we showed you before is Mehmed Ali Agca, the person who tried to assassinate the Pope in 1981. He was a member of the Grey Wolves, a Turkish neo-Ottoman, rightist, terrorist organization who in the 20th century carried out multiple terrorist attacks and political assassinations all across Europe. These are their members with Islamov, now tasked by Turkey's President Erdogan in helping, quote, liberate Crimea, an ultra-right paramilitary, a known terrorist organization, friends of Medjelis and other activists like Islamov. Again, seeing this, the question of why Medjelis can no longer be seen as representing the Crimean Tatars is definitively answered. There's another organization that claims to represent even more people, to be nothing less than a caliphate, an Islamic state. But thank Allah, 99.99999% of Muslims don't agree with this. And I'm sure there are a few individuals who would argue that banning the Nazi party infringes on the rights of the German people. Luckily, those people are a tiniest minority. Are there Medjelis sympathizers in Crimea? Yes. Yes, there are. But I am willing to wager a bet that there are more sympathizers for the Paris and Brussels terrorist attacks living in Belgium than Medjugorje sympathizers living in Crimea. And luckily for all Crimeans, whether they be Russian, Crimean Tatar, Ukrainian, Greek, Jewish, or any other nationality, most people here realize the benefits of being citizens of a strong Russia that encourages their language and religion, rather than being citizens of Europe's poorest country, a collapsing state fighting a civil war that for 23 years ignored them and failed to bring any real and significant benefits to the proud and great Crimean Tatar people.
Thank you for watching. Once again, you see that the things that are really going on here are very different than what is reported from London, Kiev, Brussels, or Washington. These things that we showed you, they're not top secret, they're all open source. These people who are here, they're all available to talk. But for some reason, nobody cares to do that. And that is why we're doing these films. That is why we're trying to show the truth to you. And maybe somebody in Washington or Brussels, people who make decisions, will even watch this and actually know what is really going on here, instead of retransmitting information from some crazy people, terrorist-connected people, who have not been here for years. And maybe at some point, somebody from Washington or Brussels, or even Kiev, where people now claim to love the Crimean Tatars, will come here and actually find out what is going on here themselves. But until then, we're gonna bring you these videos. We're gonna try to show you the truth of what is going on in Crimea, in Donbass, around Ukraine and other regions. For our previous two videos from Crimea, they should be here on the right. And for our previous videos from Donbass, they should be here on the left. So please also sign up for our channel to get future videos that we do. Please like, subscribe, and please share. Thank you.